But the biggest natural resource that we haven't paid attention to is our youth. We've been worried about our exit strategy because we're an aging state. We haven't been focused on our entry staff feeder system. And that's what's going to continue our focus on to revitalize our state. That's what it's going to take, because young people are energetic. They'll be innovative. If we open up their minds and get out of their way, they'll be entrepreneurial. Get government off their back, off all of our backs.
Hi, my name is Matt Gagne, and I'm the CEO of the Maine Heritage Policy Center, and we're back again with yet another gubernatorial candidate interview on policy, and we're very pleased to have Shawn Moody in here today to give us his take on what he thinks the big issues in the state of Maine are and what he'd like to do about them. Shawn, thanks so much for coming today.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, Shawn, for everybody that's come in here so far, I've started off with a pretty easy softball. I think that should be a good place to start.
That's unlike you.
I know, right? Well, we got an hour, so there's plenty more. But it is, I think, an important question anyway, though, even though it is, I think, an easy one to answer. The idea of running for governor is a big daunting task, obviously. I'm sure that you'd have plenty of horror stories about running across the state. It's not easy to do. What made you get into this? And I guess specifically what I'm asking is there a problem that you identify out there that you really want to solve? Is there some reason that really motivated you to get involved?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's multifaceted, but primarily what struck me was when the 5 ballot initiatives all appeared. Was it almost a couple years ago now? And when you look down that lineup, okay, they're going after the guns, you know, drugs, going to introduce another drug. They're going to tell us how to run a business by setting wages and how we're going to pay people with a tip credit and things. They're going to increase the state income tax by 40% and ranked choice voting. So they're messing with our election system. If that's not enough to motivate anybody to want to get involved and participate to make a difference, I don't know what is. So that I could see, and again, when you're in the capacity I'm in and been in for 40 years, I'm the guy that's got to be looking ahead all the time and seeing smoke before it becomes fire. So you become really good at, you know, having vision and being able to see this is going to be a train wreck, and it has been. You know, and someone asked me the other day, said, "Why do you think there's so much tension?" It was a TV interview in the legislature over the last couple of years. I said, it's because of the citizens' referendum. You know, those 5 initiatives were separated in large part by less than 5,000 votes. So when you talk about being completely split, it's incredibly, you know, incredible how people were divided so closely. So we got work to do. So I really feel like that citizens' referendum is basically, I call it the legislative vigilantes. You know, they found a way with out-of-state money to push an agenda onto the Maine people, and I want to prevent that from happening.
Okay, so that's a great place to start, because I definitely was going to get to that. It seems to be, you know, something that has now, for some reason, split along party lines. We see Democrats, I think, in favor of the system the way it is, and seeing how it goes, even though they have to deal with it in the legislature. They seem to be relatively supportive of the referendum process, whereas Republicans are frequently critics of the system, and they'd like to see it changed. If this was one of the primary motivating factors for you getting involved in the race, what would you like to see done as governor about the referendum process? And I guess as a sort of twin question to that, what do you think is realistically possible to actually get done?
And that's, you know, Matt, I love it when you say that, because I'm running in this race and I'm hearing people say, you know, we're going to eliminate the income tax. We do all these things that sound good to voters, but the reality, you're a realist like I am. I think the reality surrounding the citizens' referendum is we need to expand the, you know, the influence to the entire state. You know, it's really, these referendums are being driven primarily out of the highly populated areas like Portland, you know, the cities, and rural Maine, or the 2nd district is really not being represented properly or equitably. So I would ask that those signatures have to be split equally across the 2 districts.
To try to give a more holistic opinion of the state of Maine on whether or not this is something we want to put on the ballot.
That's right. So it'd have to be, you'd have to get the same percentage of votes out of the 2nd district, excuse me, signatures, as the 1st district to get on the ballot. Now I know there's some things that aren't constitutional, like limiting, you know, paying people for signatures. I don't like that, but
right.
Realistic, I don't know if that's something that we can eliminate. But I just really think after going through this, Maine voters are wising up, and I'm really anxious to see what happens on June 12th. And I encourage everybody to go. Obviously, everyone watching this is going to know. Vote no on June 12th. Let's give it a ranked choice.
You know, we absolutely MHPC. By we definitely support that proposal you're talking about. You're talking about basically the first congressional district, second congressional district plan, where you try to get an equal number from each. Even though we support the plan, though, it seems like it's not big enough to really ultimately change the system. I mean, do you think that that would actually make a meaningful difference? If you're Michael Bloomberg and you've got like $9 million that you've targeted for Maine, I mean, is that really a roadblock for you to come in here and
if we hadn't
use
gone
this as a
through
sandbox?
this, maybe not, but there's a more educated electorate now. Because I mean, sometimes things got to get worse before they get better, and I think this is a situation where that's going to happen. Because the people I talk, and Laura and I, we travel the whole state, people are fired up about this, and it's not going away. So I really believe that you know, the 5,000 or 10,000 votes, that pendulum now is swung back the other way. People recognize it. This is not good. It's not being driven, you know, from the people of Maine. It's outside influence. And let me just say this, man, on that topic. I'm not opposed to the citizen referendum. Okay, like I wouldn't want to see it eliminated, and I will tell you why. It wasn't that long ago, was it 5 or 6 years ago, that I voted for it to eliminate, to overturn the tax overhaul.
Right.
They were going to tax up to 200 services, right, like labor, working on cars. So half of what we do is labor. So they would have started charging our customers 5.5% sales tax. Small businesses that never had to charge tax before now going to fill out all the forms and start doing all this paperwork, everything. So I was like, so I think that's the citizen referendum process is in place to keep the legislature in check, not become the legislature. That's the difference.
I guess that's really the $64,000 question, though, is how do you preserve that sort of capability by the Maine people to be able to do something? And I think you're right in identifying that specific one as a really good example of it. That one was a really grassroots-oriented effort that was spearheaded by a bunch of people that didn't really want that to happen, and they got the Maine people on their side without any real outside help.
That's right.
How do you marry that with, you know, this latest one that's going to be on the ballot in November with the Maine People's Alliance, where you got
3.8%, yeah,
$400,000 plus of George Soros money that's parachuting in to make this kind of thing happen and use us as, again, a sandbox for a policy that, you know, they can experiment with relatively cheaply. I mean, it's kind of tough to be able to do both, isn't it?
Well, that one is, especially because again, they're pulling on everybody's heartstrings. Who doesn't want to provide more, you know, resources to keep, you know, elderly in their homes and take care of them? But the economic impact.
It's the same thing they did with the education thing too, right? It's you want to make sure they educate kids, so you tie it together with a tax increase.
Correct. So I think it's paramount that those citizen referendums, ballot initiatives, are vetted. You know, they're just not vetted. There's no vetting process in place. So here we are. You know, we're passing ranked choice. Always not constitutional. Already been issued an opinion of the State Supreme Court. The other side of that is you've got a conflict with marijuana in terms of aligning with federal law. I see that as a big problem. So be able to vet, and also the economic impact, right, of tax policy, which should be done legislatively with public hearings and everything else. So you're right, man. I think that's an area that needs to be added on to, or has to be a priority in order to get these to the ballot. You know, that's got to all happen before it gets on the ballot. And obviously the wording is so controversial.
That's a really great point.
Ballots is like, are you serious? You're in the booth. An average voter looks at that and tries to read a paragraph and figure out that they don't know this.
Well, the ranked choice voting one is a great example of that. I mean, if you read the question that's going to be on the ballot, according to the Secretary of State right now, it took me about 5 or 6 reads before I was really confident that I knew what yes and no meant. Right.
And coming from you, right, in your capacity.
Right. I mean, a reasonably informed voter that pays attention to this stuff, it's for somebody who might sort of just encounter it when they get there on election day or maybe just there before that. It seems like a very complicated process, and it doesn't accurately, to me, reflect the will of the voter, because you're dealing with things that are so complex, particularly when you get into like tax policy.
And we've been through this, and we've been down this road so many times that I'm a little cynical. Okay, I don't think it's just because they just didn't get it right on this one. I mean, they're not getting it right on all of them, in my view. They're not breaking it down into a simple, easy to follow format, and to me, it's an intentional way to confuse the voter, to push the balance of the vote. That's the way I look at it.
Well, let me ask you, I guess, philosophically about some of these ideas here, because you have a variety of different things that have passed through legislative process, and when you get to the legislature, you hear the phrase that I know you've heard 1,000 times this year, which is the will of the people. Right? Yeah, the will of the people has said this. The will of the people has said that. In a lot of situations, I would cast doubt on what the will of the people was when you're talking about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the people that showed up, who, et cetera, et cetera. And some of them, though, are reasonably comfortable. They win by 15 or 20 points, and you seem to have a decisive, if not a raw majority of Maine voters, like at least the people, the plurality that show up and vote, saying they'd like to do something, right? What responsibility do you think lawmakers have to deal with these referendums once passed? You know, is it the expressed will of the people? Do they have a responsibility to try to uphold that spirit in the law? Maybe kind of like they did with the marijuana legalization, where you had a lot of people that disagreed with it, who didn't really like it, but voted to implement it in a way that was consistent with how they passed it and just fixed the problems with the law? Or do you think that you should just go by your principle? For instance, I know that you've been pretty loudly critical of the marijuana law, just as an example, and say, nope, you know what, they may have passed this, but this is a bad idea. We got to get rid of it.
I think it just takes, you know, we have a legislature. You know, it's the three branches of government. It's critical to our democracy. And the citizens' referendum, let me be clear, has to be reformed dramatically in order for it to continue to work and serve the purpose that I think it was originally intended for. So I believe that once these ballot initiatives are, let's just, because we're talking about a little bit in past history, the 5 that were approved, 4 out of the 5, the 4 that were approved, I think the legislature's got to go to work, take each on its own merits, do the economic impact, do you know, the conflict with federal law for marijuana, for example. And here's my thing. If you look at marijuana, it was worded, do you allow or would you approve the recreational use of marijuana? Well, it's not. It's the full-blown commercialization of marijuana. Mm-hmm. And I've said this openly, publicly so many times, there's not a clinically proven way to test for impairment right now. So I asked people, I said, would you even consider taking the blood alcohol test out of alcohol? So people could drive, have a 12-pack, literally have a fatal
and
crash.
Just have no way of knowing.
Correct. And then a good attorney, they walk. And then they look at you like, yeah, no, that never happened. Well, here we are, introducing another drug. So to answer your question, Matt, that legislation should do what's right. It's not, if the will of the people, I mean, we have a republic for a reason. It's not a democracy for a reason. Because our founding fathers knew, just because the majority of people are in favor of something, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best long-term interest of the entire population. Mm. So I would say to the legislature, do your homework, vet it, scrub it, have the public hearings, do it work, and then do what's right. And that may be, no, we're not going to pass it. Yeah, take the heat. That's the way it is. Yeah,
something I definitely agree with you on. You know, as we're asking about these referendums, there's been a number of things. We could ask you specifically about each one of the ideas that's been passed, but that would be a long list. One of the ones, though, that does strike me as a very topical conversation we could have here is the question of clean elections. And I know that that's, you know, sort of topical because you have one of your opponents is running as a clean elections candidate. But actually, I'm interested in the question from a sort of broader view of the program, because you have right now a situation where state legislative candidates, both state Senate and state House, are running not universally as clean election candidates, but pretty close. Right. I mean, you've got 90+% of people, Republican and Democrat, that are running as clean election candidates. A lot of those people don't want to, but feel like they have to because their opponents are going to have that much money and they don't think they can raise it privately. What do you think should be done about the clean election system? Should it be removed for governor? Should it be entirely scrapped altogether? Is there somewhere where you think that you should lower the amount of money that's given to them and you keep the process in place? Right. Where do you fall on this question?
Me personally, I think it should be eliminated, and here's
why. Top to bottom.
Yeah, I just feel like, again, go back to the founding fathers. They wanted people that, you know, blacksmiths and craftsmen, farmers, and people within the community. They worked hard, they built a reputation within the community, raised their family, got to a point in their life, had a great reputation, then they went and served. Then they went back to work. Well, if you follow that model, You can't tell me that you wouldn't have enough, popularity and relationships built up to raise an adequate amount of money compared to an opponent to be competitive. So we get away from that model. Now what happens is people go to school for political science, they work on a campaign, then they become a candidate. And Barack Obama is a perfect example. Then they become they become elected. Yeah, exactly. And they have limited life's experience, economic experience, business experience, all those factors that are pretty important to driving our economy. And so you look at what the current situation is now. You have what could be seemingly career politicians that have already found a way to work the system. It's not illegal. It's not, people are doing it. But that, to me, you've heard me say it, and the other candidates bristle when I do say it. I'll be clear. When I say politician and I say public servant, they're not mutually inclusive. A public servant is someone who's heart is the right place, work for the people, and they're going to be a servant style leader, going to serve the people. A politician is someone that figures a way to game the system for their own benefit. Then they become a politician because they can become a self-servant, not a public servant. So that's how I delineate between who's a politician, who's a public servant. And I admire and I respect public servants, and there's many good ones in the state of Maine.
So, I guess when you're asking about public financing, the big argument for those who are in favor of the clean election system really comes down to the fact that they distrust the participation of money in the system. Is there any part of you that is skeptical of dollars? And by that I mean, when you see George Soros spending $400,000, do you not like that? Do you think it's illegitimate? Do you think that it's false and fake? And do you think we should be doing anything to try to prevent it? Or do you think that it's just basically the nature and the market of ideas, I guess, working its way out?
Me personally, and our company, everything is transparent. We get open book management. So to me personally, I don't think they should have super PACs, people hiding behind, although it's interesting, the ones that ran against us, the people had to actually say their names, the top 3 donors. I think that's great because that way it gets them out in the public eye so you know where the money is coming from, to your point, Matt. And I think, like back on the clean elections, me personally, I don't know how you can call yourself a fiscal conservative and then take $700,000 from the taxpayers to fund your campaign. That doesn't pass the straight face test with me, and I don't think it will with Republican voters. So I think the Republicans are more resolved, resolute on clean election to say, no, go out there, work, raise money because people want to support you. They believe in your values. They believe in what you're going to bring, as governor or whatever office you're running for. So I think I feel very strongly about this. I think it goes against, to me, if being a fiscal conservative or being a Republican, especially. I think the Democrat Party has been very they've advocated for the clean elections, and they're the ones that are really pushing it and promoting it.
Do you think there's any sort of likelihood that we'd be able to do even a curtailment of that?
Yeah, let's I'd like to get rid of it, period. And I think,
well, I know you'd like to, but what I'm thinking of is, like, you end up being governor, and then you have the same legislature we do now. You have a 18-17 split in the
You might have
Senate.
To compromise and say, okay, let's leave it to the House, in Senate races, and let's put a reasonable cap on it. If you can negotiate that with not having a majority.
Yeah.
But we're going to get a majority next fall, man. Think positive.
You're an optimist. I like that.
Hey, we did in 2010. We can do it again.
So the question of referendums does give us the opportunity to move in any policy direction we want to now, since it seems that referendums are now dictating all levels of policy. But one that's on top of my mind right now is the question of health care. Specifically, of course, we have the Medicaid expansion referendum question that occurred, and then now we're asked this November about universal in-home care. Right. So it's a big topic, obviously, is how we manage the healthcare system in the state of Maine. I guess the first question I have for you in that sphere of issues relates to that ballot question that passed with Medicaid. There have been seemingly a variety of opinions from not only the Republican candidates but also legislators I've talked to, and actually the governor, on exactly how to handle the Medicaid expansion question. I heard the governor say at an event that we held 2 or 3 weeks ago, I can't even remember how long ago it was now, but he basically said he's no longer even arguing about whether or not it should be done. He wants to make sure that it's done in a responsible way that's been paid for, and that the taxpayers aren't given a specific burden.
Align with the governor pretty much, and I didn't hear what he had said, but basically what I've said, I think is in alignment with that. Just say, okay, you know, the same people that kind of coerce the voters or convince the voters to vote for it, the same legislators that were in favor of it, need to come up with a viable way to appropriate for it. You know,
but if they did, and I apologize for interrupting you, Shawn.
Well, without robbing the rainy day fund, without gimmicks, and without raising taxes. You know,
let's say they could.
We're all waiting
theoretically, even though I think that that's very dust. But let's assume that they could. You think that we should implement it. And the reason I'm asking that question is I've talked to a number of lawmakers who think that even though it was passed by referendum, it's a terrible idea. It's damaging to the economy. We just can't do it. So it's a straight no. We can't let it happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I'm in that camp. You know, we can't let it happen. But I think, you know, that there's also procedures, and there's only so much the governor could do in relationship to that. So again, the reality is, it's the train is down this far the track, and we got to just make sure we have to ensure that it doesn't undo some of the hard work that Governor LePage has done to put us in a good fiscal place.
Let me ask you a broad philosophical question, I guess. Healthcare is so complicated.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, there's so many different moving parts. You have what the federal government does. You have what the state does. You have things like PL90, which is brought up frequently with all the candidates when you talk about, which used to be, or still is, a state law, but has been basically overruled by Obamacare's presence.
Right, exactly.
What do you think in the current environment? Let's assume that the ACA is there forever, because it seems like the federal government's never going to act on getting rid of it. Maybe you're optimistic that they will, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Let's just say that they're not going to, though, and you're going to have to live under the system for a while. Are there other things we can do? Is there something that we at the state level can do to try to go around that system, reform it, change it, make it better? Do you have any specific healthcare plan ideas that you think you'd like to try to accomplish if you became governor, you know, in that kind of a scenario?
Yeah, I think healthcare reform, statewide reform, has got to be a top priority. And I said that way back. I said that, just saw this coming. You know, again, we experienced our healthcare premiums at our business have crossed $1 million this year. So a lot of things that we talk about, we're on top of. We've got wellness programs. You know, we went self-insured this year to avoid these 20-25% increases. You know, but the problem is most of Maine's employers are small. You know, 20 people or less. That's not an option for them. So transparency is key. You know, let's just shift the conversation a little bit from healthcare insurance to healthcare cost, which we're kind of the same. When you look at, you know, getting a price, let's say you're going you go shopping for anything, literally, you know, you go grocery shopping or you go get gas, whatever. The price on the products or services that you're buying or being delivered are in front of you. Healthcare is an exception to that. So when you're going for non-emergency related procedure, say you're having a knee replacement, that hospital or the healthcare provider has got to give you an itemized list of what the cost's going to be. It's $15,000, whatever it may be. So you got a quote, whatever you want to call it. Again, non-emergency. I know people thinking you're going to be shipped
You're in
there
the ambulance on your way there, getting a
I'm not paying that for a new, you know, get my hat. I have a stint. So, so let's say it is your knee replacement. Then you create what America was based on, capitalism, a competitive environment.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because I mean they do have, that's true of a lot in medical care, but they do have the Maine Health Data Organization, which has a published list of a lot of stuff that's in there. The problem that we found with it, though, is that any sort of transparent price listing seems to be irrelevant to the consumer because they don't have a financial role in the decision-making process. Like if you were to get the knee replacement, you know, somewhere for $10,000 less, you don't save anything.
Think about what you just said, though. When you think about today and today's current environment, before there was probably a $100 deductible or a $250 deductible.
Right.
Now it could be $6,000. Total different ball game. So I think the consumer wants it. I think the medical, industry is preventing it, blocking it from happening. And as governor, working with the legislature, those are the types of reforms that we can put in place statewide that don't conflict with the federal law, which over time oversteps a great bill like LD9 is a great bill, and it stopped it in its tracks. So that's one area. Hospital waste. Oftentimes when you say you've had a procedure, everything's sterilized. So after you get shipped out, whatever they didn't use, which could be a variety of instruments or gauze or whatever it is, they throw out. So we spend hundreds of millions of dollars in waste where we could recycle or re-sterilize those unused instruments or bandages, whatever it may be. So health care has been allowed to be extremely wasteful. Tort reform, right? Frivolous lawsuits. We should take a look and say, look, if you bring a frivolous lawsuit and it's thrown out, you should have to pay the attorney to bring it forward. So cutting down on frivolous lawsuits, tort reform here in the state of Maine. There's a lot that we can do, Matt. But nobody's sitting on the hands. Oh, we're going to wait for the feds. We can't wait. It's going up 25 or 30%.
That's something that we very much agree with you on.
It's
because
not sustainable.
I don't, there are some people that are optimistic that the Trump administration is going to come up with some action, whether it's by executive order or they might get something through Congress or whatever. But I don't believe that that's going to happen in the short term.
I disagree. I think they will. I think Speaker Ryan getting done. I think he was the one. I think, again, this is all what you're reading here.
Sure.
But I really think that President Obama trusted Ryan to put this deal together, and it collapsed at the final hour, at 1 or 2 votes short, 1 vote short, whatever it was. I don't think the Trump administration saw that coming, and I think that it's devastating. That'll be one of the, when you look back in history, look back on that vote, that'll be one of the most egregious things that could have happened. It didn't go through for the American people because the costs associated with, Matt, I've been around the state talking to people, and their health care insurance premiums are more than their mortgages. I mean, these are older people that, they bought a house that was $800 a month.
And that's just their premiums. That's not the out-of-pocket expense that they have for their deductibles. Yeah.
It is a crisis, and we need to act. That'll be a priority.
Well, the thing, I guess the reason I'm bringing up my skepticism that they're going to act is really that I think that the state has to figure out what it wants to do, assuming they don't. And then if they do, then happily we're surprised and we got a much better system.
That's right, exactly.
But, I asked you about incentives, and you brought up that you're self-insured now. And what we found across the state at MHPC is that a lot of the self-insured companies are doing a program whereby they are actively shopping their consumers for health care. The people who are in there are looking at these procedures.
Absolutely.
And because they are afforded a cash benefit in terms of money towards their
15,
deductible
off.
Or cash and, they get a check,
exactly.
right? They are now incentivized to look for the lower expense cost, and
go to
suddenly
Boston. Cheaper to go to Boston.
It is, and they get better quality care.
Pay to put them up for a couple nights. They're happy.
Significantly less. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars.
We live it. We live it, so we know.
And so that has been at some of these places that self-insure. You found that that's leveling out prices, and that premiums are able to either go down or stay flat.
We're in a position right now, and again, it's we could have somebody that's terminally ill. I mean, anything can happen. It's insurance. It's risk. We have gap insurance and put that in place to be conservative. But we estimate right now, we're almost like midway through the year, I'll bet we'll probably save a couple $100,000 this year.
Yeah.
Now, think about that. That's huge. Versus we probably would have been whacked with another 20% increase.
Right.
That would have cost us. That's a $400,000 swing.
Right, and it'll allow you to either keep premiums where they are or lower them, and maybe increase benefits at the same time. It's good for you, but it's all because you had some sort of a market force involved there. People are actually shopping. And
the thing is, what drives us to do that?
Yeah.
Because we want to retain our good people, and if you don't provide good benefits, right, and good pay, they're not going to stay with you. Yeah. So that's part of that initiative that we're always staying on the leading edge of. How do we provide the best work environment, the best pay, and best benefits to attract and retain the best people?
So it sounds like that's something that you would probably support expanding towards, I guess, how the commercial market works in Maine. I know we passed a law this last year called Right to Shop, which basically tries to introduce a lot of these principles, but it's really, it's a tenth of what I wanted it to happen in the beginning. But if you like the principle,
I'm going to get you that other 9/10.
I love the 9/10.
Next November.
That's what I'm looking forward to. Somebody signing, whoever ends up winning. And at the same time, though, there are other things that are interesting in healthcare in terms of free market reforms. I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the direct primary care industry, but there are some really fascinating things being done there where you just
pay so much a month. And you're
out of the insurance market.
Michael Champy, he's a great guy, right down Westbrook. He's one of the doctors that initiated that in Maine.
Yeah, do you think that there's a role for that, I guess, in maybe a dreamier, bigger scale healthcare reform proposal? Because I got to tell you, what Dr. Champy and others do across the state, it is so much less expensive, and they give so much better care, completely removing themselves from the insurance market.
You've got such a crew here at the Maine Heritage Policy Center. They'll appreciate this. I try to boil things down to simple terms. Capitalism is founded on just like that. Michael Champy and that crew, right? Costs are soaring, so there's an opportunity for someone to come in. Now, here's capitalism. Those guys start biting the hospitals and networks in the ankle. And if they're successful and they can roll it out and scale it up, they start biting them in the rear end.
Mm-hmm.
That's how capitalism works. It doesn't matter if you're starting a body shop from scratch. Okay, it's how you become competitive. and you overcome, right? Because the competition is not going to sit there and let you eat their lunch. So they're going to face enormous pressure, legislative pressure. They have lobbyists. They're going to work to try to prevent this from scaling up. And as governor, I recognize how capitalism works because I experienced it when I was a kid. And the only way that America's going to get back on track is by true capitalism. And that's it right there, forming.
Yeah, I wonder if that's not, frankly, the future of the healthcare system in general, whether or not like encouraging that type of an industry is something that, you know, government could, you know, basically unshackle them and allow them to grow and go around so much of what the Affordable Care Act does, and taking so much of that money that's spent in the system now and making it irrelevant. I
say to people all the time, I say, you know, you hear people say, you know, we need to decrease regulations, you know, these regulations. Well, guess what? There are lobbyists that get paid big money to make sure those regulations are put in place to block competition. So in some cases, they want regulation because enough regulation prevents the Dr. Michael Champies and that's creating that network of becoming viable. They're going to do all they can to make sure that that doesn't happen if it starts eating into their revenue stream.
Yeah, you said something really interesting there that I want to come back to because it reminds me of something with occupational licensing that I do want to ask you about. But I do want to quickly finish up with the topic of healthcare, though, because you can't really talk about this subject without getting to the elephant in the room, which is the opioid crisis. And I know you and the rest of the candidates have been asked this a million times, but it still does strike me as the biggest problem out there right now in the state of Maine in terms of healthcare related issues that continually befuddles policymakers on how to fix, how to do something about. And I guess I have two questions for you. The first one is, do you think that there is a possible fix? You know, the legislature comes in every single session and they say they're going to do something, they pass a bill, nothing happens, it gets worse. Do you think that really government can even do anything? And secondly, if you do, what can it do? I mean, what is the next phase of us fighting against this crisis?
Okay, well, I'm going to say something before I answer those two questions.
Sure.
The first thing I would say is 65 or 70% of the street heroin and fentanyl is sold to people that were originally started on prescription medication, prescription painkillers. So the first thing that needs to happen, and I'm saying I'd be the one to initiate as governor, we need a class action lawsuit against Big Pharma and the FDA, just like we did in the tobacco industry. That's what it's going to take, because you can't tell me that they didn't know. They did the drug, they did the testing, they got the approvals, and they're sitting back. So they've basically advantaged themselves from capitalism, unchecked, unregulated properly, because the government was involved. And I think that is the elephant in the room. We need to hold FDA and Big Pharma accountable, and we're not. That's a big one. Okay, the second, to answer your first question, can we fix it? We have to fix it. And yes, we can fix it. You know, drunk driving has dropped dramatically here, okay, in the state of Maine. Now, when you look at the access and the accessibility to fentanyl and street drugs, these are criminal organizations coming into our state, pushing drugs, okay? And they go after, they attack and target our most vulnerable population on the street. We need to beef up the MDA, you know, local law enforcement, state police, sheriff's department. That's one component, okay? The second side of it is prevention and education. Early on, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. That's how you prevent the opiate crisis from to continue to scale up. You got to stop people from going down that road with education.
It sounds a lot like the old DARE program back in the day.
It's got to be way more robust and way more impactful than that. I mean, you got to introduce these addicts to kids so they can meet them personally and see how their life has become, you know, how quick their life can become. They can devastate themselves with just a few bad decisions. So education prevention is huge, paramount. And the last part is treatment. I mean, we have to take care of the population of people that are addicted right now. I'm a big proponent of sober houses, because I really believe if you're in a sober house environment and you're around recovering addicts and former addicts, nobody can understand what you're going through like a former addict or an addict can. You know, all the counselors and things, and there's a role for them to play. But most people that I've talked to say their pathway to sobriety came through a peer. You know, somebody that's been there and gone through it. And they build that trust, they build that relationship, and they start, you know, taking that hard walk towards putting their life back together. And so the sober houses, I think, are effective and will work in terms of the treatment aspect. So that covers those three components. But the big one is we've got to stop the flow of the opiates into our healthcare and our patients' system. So you got to stop that, slow it down. You got to get the people back on their feet that are impaired, that are addicts, and you got to go after the drug dealers and the people that are pushing these drugs into our neighborhoods.
You brought up the topic of basically suing.
We can do it. We can do it.
Oh, sure.
But it's going to take a strategic, multifaceted approach to do it.
Yeah. Well, we certainly saw this happen in the 1980s specifically. We saw a really big drug crisis,
Right.
and it did dissipate over time. So there are possibilities on doing that for sure. One of the things you brought up, though, is very interesting to me. You brought up the idea of suing Big Pharma basically over their role in this. And
the FDA. The FDA
yeah.
actually approves these drugs to go to market.
Well, okay, so that's the source of my question, because I think this is a differentiator. I haven't heard the other candidates, frankly, Republican or Democrat, talk about this too much. What role? I guess whose responsibility is it to manage this? Because this is a really
out there that
big philosophical question here, right? These are very dangerous drugs, and I think we all kind of sort of knew they were, but doctors have been handing them out like candy. I mean, is there a level of culpability in the doctors who, frankly, knew
the whole supply chain, man? Then you can't leave them out either. But once you start an investigation, once you start a lawsuit, they're gonna have evidence. This isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, but that's a long-term fix, And if we don't ever start that process,
oh no, I appreciate you attacking it in multiple. I guess what I'm getting at is that if this pain mitigation strategy of an opioid drug is a net positive to people who are in chronic pain or have back surgery or whatever, and the manufacturers of it, Big Pharma as we've referred to them, are producing this thing that is in fact good for certain things, but has this incredibly powerful hold on people and can turn into something bad. Is that Big Pharma's fault? Or is it the people that have, I guess, sold a lot of it and made a lot of it happen? Is it the doctors and the pharmacies and the
FDA's and Big Pharma's responsibility to bring products to market, drugs in this case, that are going to be reasonably safe for consumption? And they failed in doing that.
Well, let's move on to the other question that you sparked in my mind when you were talking about sort of like the system and regulation and how some people want regulation because it helps keep their competitors out of the system. We see this a lot with occupational licensing. We see it an awful lot with occupational licensing, where you have a system, a preposterous system, people who cut hair for a living, right? Where you have to be licensed to do that.
That's why my mom was a hairdresser.
Exactly,
I can remember the license on the wall there.
Exactly, and so the people who want the system the most are the people who are currently in the system and have their license, because it stops other people who might do it on the side from, starting up a business. And,
I think you have to look at the occupation, because I think some warrant licensing. I really do, because of safety, competency, skill, and then there's others that don't. So I think you really have to.
What's your standard? Is it like health and safety? Is that where the line is, or does it go beyond that?
I'm thinking of well drillers, for example. Well drillers have to be licensed. But you think you're working on a rig, it's $500,000 up, and you're drilling into the ground, which is extraordinarily difficult, complex. So I think personally there should be licensing requirements for people that are highly skilled, highly trained, that have expensive equipment in order to do the job. I can see licensing in those areas, but I think there's fewer than those than the ones that don't require licensing. So overall, my broad brush on that is not require licensing. I think that's, in my view. I mean, it's America's free market. People ought to be able to start something and run with it, and the consumers, to some degree, are going to dictate who's going to.
The argument we always run into is people say that it's protection. It's basically by getting a license like that, we're protecting the
Body
consumer.
shops aren't licensed, and I can
That's
remember
what
years
I mean.
ago.
Is you would probably have an interesting
opinion on our brakes, airbag systems.
Right.
I mean, you talk about safety.
I mean, people's lives are entrusted to the brakes you were fixing.
That's right.
Right, and you're not licensed.
That's right.
And what happens is if you fix a car,
we're certified, but that's different.
Well, sure, no, totally. But there isn't a license requirement here. And if you fix a car that looks terrible, or the brakes don't work right, or whatever, you're going to take a negative hit in that business which means that people are not going to go there for future brake jobs.
No, I agree with you,
right?
Matt. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
License.
we could continue on, I think, with that conversation for quite a while, but I think I understand your basic
philosophy. We can pick up the pace if you want.
Oh no, we got plenty to get to. I think one thing that I've been interested to ask all of the candidates about has been education, because we haven't really. I know that when I did the St. Joseph's Forum with you, and
thank you for
we did
moderating that.
You're welcome.
That was fun.
And we did the WGAN Forum too. We didn't really get a chance to talk about
that
education.
That wasn't as much fun, but I appreciate you moderating that.
Yeah, well, I think you did a good job in both of them, but the topic didn't really get a chance to get explored very much. So I'd like to kind of touch on it a little bit now, because this is obviously going to be one of the chief things that the governor, whoever the next governor is going to have to tackle for an issue.
That's right.
And I guess my first question to you in the realm of education really circulates around this proficiency-based education question. We see what happened in Scarborough and how there's sort of almost a revolt from the parents and the teachers against something that looks like proficiency-based education. Some like it, some don't. What's your view on proficiency being demonstrated in school and the system that we have now? Is there room for reform? Should it be repealed? What do you think?
I think it's an evolution. And here, let me go back. Here's what's wrong with education. Okay, education is controlled in large part by the bureaucracies of either the federal, Department of Education, or at the state level. So whether it's Race to the Top, No Child Left Behind, Common Core, it's always a continuous.
It's something.
Yeah, we get a better idea. And what bothers me is, you're changing the initiative, changing all this, the philosophy behind how you teach in the classroom and how you, educate our students, and it just seems like, well, they haven't figured out. It keeps changing. So proficiency-based learning is another model, right, that they've come up with that we need to implement. They feel like we need to implement, and here we go again. So I would just say there's aspects to that. I mean, let's start with a proficiency-based diploma, right, which is different.
Right.
I would oppose that. I just don't think the 1, 2, 3, 4 grading system is something that we're ready for as a educational culture here in the state of Maine. I think people are used to the current and the traditional grading system. We're not necessarily convinced that colleges and universities would unilaterally accept a new grading system. That's a problem if you want to go into college. So that's that. Proficiency-based learning, I think the more robust school systems like Scarborough, for example, that have curriculum advisors and coordinators, I mean, they have a whole infrastructure of people that can help them work through an implementation. I'm not saying that that's going to work, but they
can survive it.
Right, exactly, because they have the people in place to try to implement it, and that's what they're attempting to do. But that's a small population of school systems and districts in the state. Most of our school districts don't have the luxury of having all these extra people in the walls and administrators and things like that. So it could be a disaster for them to try to implement it, fail at implementing it, and the students are the one that pay the price of a poor implementation. And that's what really government is horrible at. They're great at thinking of new ideas, new strategies. They don't sit around and think and talk ad nauseum. But when it comes time to, okay, operationally, how do we implement this? That's where government fails miserably. So I personally don't trust the fact that they feel like the education system, as bureaucratic as it is, and institutionalized and siloed as it is, that has the agility or the nimbleness, like private practice, to implement an initiative like that successfully. I don't think they can do it. I really don't.
Do you think that, I guess as we approach this question, it's every new administration that comes in, both federally and in the state level, seems to have new ideas on what to do about education. And I think, as you touched on, it's Common Core, it's proficiency, it's whatever. It's a
common
new thing.
sense. How about common sense?
So
that'd be a novel idea.
What should we do? I mean, should we go back to the old Maine learning results from the 1990s and call it good because we performed really well when they were in place, or is there a different approach you'd like to take?
Well, and again, I think if you look at our resume, okay, and we're going to get more probably into economics, which again, I have that business background and acumen. But if you look at my education resume, okay, I've been appointed, Governor LePage appointed me to the University System Board and the Community College System Board of Trustees. Nobody had ever served in that capacity to be on both. Now think about when I get on there 4 years ago, okay, University System, USM was upside down. You couldn't transfer credits, the Community College System. So we've fixed a lot of those things and got those systems to collaborate now at a level never seen before. which the students benefit from that. And so that has been a very successful, experience of collaboration between two institutions. I also have a resume by serving on the school and business roundtable in my hometown of Gorham. So we've got, actually, USM President Glenn Cummins is on it, but the superintendent, the principal of the high school, we've got the town manager, we've got the adult ed coordinator, we've got the fellow that coordinates junior achievement, Ryan Chicoine, who does a fantastic job, and we've got 5 or 6 business leaders in the community, all at the table, talking about how we're going to improve education. We reintroduced the co-op program. That's what I did my junior, senior year of high school. I actually worked and got credit for it. I get out of school early. So we reintroduced that, now is morphed into the junior achievement program. I think we got 40 students in junior achievement now. So these are high school kids now working back out into our local community, which is exactly what we need to do. So when you look at education and what my background is, I'm very passionate about education. That's the key to Maine's future. It really is. Trades guy. So we're going to overhaul our vocational and our career tech ed programs, okay? They're going to be the best in the country. What we're going to do is we're going to require every vocational and career tech ed, this is the high school level, to work at a best-in-class business for 2 weeks a year, okay? So that means they get to work at, say, Moody's, for example, for a week if you're the collision repair instructor. And then you're going to work at, let's see, Hewitt's is up in Yarmouth here, right? Hewitt's Auto Body, whatever, for a week. So now we do a non-binding assessment of that instructor to find out, okay, does this instructor know how to run a vehicle through a spray boot cycle, and how to write an estimate, and how to use our frame measuring equipment. It's very advanced. It changes, week to week, year to year. So we see that there's a real benefit to keeping these instructors on the top of their game. Now you get job placement opportunities. Could we get a relationship? Job shadowing, internships, all that. So that's what we would do on the vocational side of education. The other thing, here's the big one. Here's the big one. And again, I'm going to take it back. I was 20 years old. 20 years old. So that, when you do the math, it was 38 years ago.
It was a couple years ago.
I went to a town council meeting. They were recalling the school budget down at the town, at the gym. The place was packed. And I was there for another reason, 20 years old. I was there for another reason, but I got caught up in the meeting. So I got up to speak, 20 years old, right? Gym's packed. I remember getting up there, my heart was kind of racing, like, geez, maybe it wasn't such a good idea. I was a nervous wreck. So I get up in front of them and I said, look, I said, you got teacher A, comes in, prepared, engaged with the class, connects with the kids, is excellent in the classroom. Okay, now you got teacher B, shows up at the bell, they're there, it's just a job, they're not really engaged. Okay, they both get the same pay increase. I was 20 years old. I said, until you fix that, you're never going to really make any positive, real change in education. I was 20 years old. Think about where we are today. They never changed it. Education is mediocre. We're about mid-pack, and we're not. So I would implement, I would try to negotiate, again, governor's only got so much, power, whatever, a statewide contract that would allow annual performance reviews. Okay, not merit pay, annual performance review, like we do in our company. I'm going to tell people, I'm fat, all you guys listen out there, everybody's listening. We started performance reviews at our company, and I didn't go to Harvard Business School in 1992. That was 26 years ago, quarter of a century ago. Why? Because we knew if compensation was tied to performance, and we could get feedback from our coworker to tell us how to better run our organization, how to help them succeed, that was the linchpin to our success and has been for a quarter of a century.
So that sounds to me like, what I find interesting about that approach is that it sounds less like maybe the No Child Left Behind sort of bean counting system whereby you're judging performance of schools and teachers by raw numbers on what test score says what or whatever. But it seems like almost like a peer review by a a manager, like a principal. That's
right, and it would be a group too, because that's what the teachers block. It's like, well, if I don't get along with the principal, he or she doesn't like me, I'm not going to get a raise. That's not a good system. Say, hey, have a 4 or 5 person group, which we do. We have 3, but let's say 4 or 5. So we get the principal, you've got a couple peer teachers, right?
Yep.
And maybe you've got a parent or a community member, or somebody else that can participate in that review. And that is the only thing. And I would say the educators, okay, and the MEA, morale is terrible in education.
Oh, it really is. Right? My wife's a teacher, so I appreciate everything you're saying.
Turnover is high. So all the flags are up. for reform. It just takes guts, and it takes that vision to say, and relentless to say, this is gonna happen because not only is it the right thing to do for the students to improve education, it's the right thing to do for the teachers because they don't have a voice right now. Nobody listens to them. All their decision making is done at the higher level through the union or through the bureaucracy. So that's the key to this feedback process that we've done is the teacher, the educator, has a couple of sheets that they fill out in advance to tell, we collect all that data, to tell the system what they need in the classroom to be able to do their job successfully. So it's a two-part, what can we do for you? What do you need to improve on? What do you need to work on? And man, it's the end. That is the answer.
It does seem like a far superior system, honestly, because my wife, as I think you know, is an elementary school teacher, and she always used to complain about the way that they did it, when she was teaching in Virginia, because it would be a system whereby, she would get a lot of, because she was a very good teacher, she would get a lot of students that were a couple of grade levels below.
Exactly.
And then she would, by the end of the year, I mean, these are challenging students, socioeconomically, English as a second language,
It's
that type of thing.
complicated.
And she'd get them
I feel for them.
to grade level. But then you'd have a class next door that started at grade level, and there are 3 above, and so that's a better teacher.
And I would say to your wife, Matt, and any educator out there, see, the difference between private practice is we hire. We have a hiring process, so we select our students, right? They don't. And you're absolutely right. So that's something that we have to be very careful and sensitive to, the fact that it's got to be a fair process that basically allows the teachers to share best practices amongst themselves. And they do some of that now, don't get me wrong. They do. But we could take it to the next level. And again, the good teachers know who the good teachers are. The community knows who the good teachers are.
Yeah.
And they know who the bad ones are.
And they all complain about all the stuff that they have to do for paperwork and tracking and everything. And they're not teaching because they're doing all
consuming. It's consuming their time, and they don't like it, and I don't blame them.
So before we move off to the topic of K through 12 education, I do want to get to 1 or 2 questions on higher ed too, because you touched on actually one of them very, very well. I do want to ask one thing though about money in the K through 12 system. What exactly is the role of money? I mean, we had this, in my opinion, was an arbitrary number, 55% passed years and years ago because we wanted more money into education. Yeah. We obviously saw the 3% surcharge question, also tied to education.
$160 million.
Right, $160 million. Is money correlated with educational results? And if not, what is? I mean, like, how do you make the system better if it's not money?
Well, I just described it. This is the way I feel. We can't. It goes across government too. We can't just keep throwing money against the wall, right, and hoping it sticks. And I said this at the convention, or actually no, it wasn't the convention. It was at one of the forums. We have a saying in the business: is if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And as governor, if we can't measure it, we're not going to fund it. Because the problems with our programs, there's no matrix-driven. Okay, there's no we have what we call a dashboard. Okay, you can call it KPIs, whatever it is. So it's 5 or 6 key matrix that you have in any organization that you monitor on a regular basis, and it's transparent, so everybody knows. Okay, what are your goals? Is your goal to to increase the number of students that graduate, right? Lower the dropout rate, whatever it is. Have those attainable and measurable goals in front of you. So when there is a proposal, we need more money. Okay. Why, right? What matrix is it going to go to fund to improve, and where's your plan to do that? It just can't be we need more money. Yeah, because that's just like self-defeating prophecy. So I'm very upset about the fact that the legislature gave that money with absolutely zero accountability to where's that money going to go, and how, before we give you a dime, what are you going to do with this money, and how is it going to incrementally improve the results, right? Learning results in education, and where's the KPI, where's the matrix, where's the dashboard to monitor it and measure it by, and we want to copy it, we want to see that progress every 6 months. Boom, boom, boom. Stuff's not difficult, man. Private practice, we do it day in, day out. That's what I'm going to bring as governor. We are going to measure programs so we'll know what's working, what's not working. We're going to resource the ones that are working, scale them up, and we're going to get rid of the ones that aren't working. So it's not a question of money. It's a question of management. It's world-class management that we use, sharing best practices, knowing which school is the best performing school. We have 11 locations. Guess what? We know every department, which one is outperforming the other departments. We share those best practices, and that rises all the boats. And that's why we perform at such a high level. We can do that right across state government.
You already touched on several of my questions related to higher education and community colleges and whatnot. I do want to get, though, your unique perspective, I think, sitting where you do on those boards, about the state of higher education in Maine, and specifically, actually, I'd like to ask you about community colleges and whether or not they're, I guess, serving the right role in our current society. And by that I mean it seems like it's a cheaper option for people to go get a liberal arts degree these days. It's not necessarily what I think their real role, which would be training discernible skills and maybe giving people 2-year degrees that are something you wouldn't get at a 4-year university. What do you think the
I
current
think it's a
system
great
looks like?
conversation, you know, especially for the group here, the sharp group, and they pay attention. Here's what it is, okay? The most employable skills that are necessary in today's environment and going forward, trending, are what we call, the technical skills, technical application skills, and then you're going to just hear me out here before you get queasy, and you need those, they call them liberal arts skills, but you need the ability to collaborate, to critical think, to strategize, and to work as a team. Okay, those bundled, we call it skill bundling. You bundle those skills together, you are going to be not only employable, you're going to be very successful in today's environment. If you only have one or the other, you can be limited.
That's when you're in trouble.
You can be limited in your upward mobility. So you may have the technical skills, but you're not going to work your way into a leadership or a management position because you don't have the critical thinking or the problem solving or the ability to get people to work together, motivate them, incentivize them. You don't have that. So you need both. And I think what the community college has been criticized for is it's a fair criticism, but I think people need to step back and look at where we are 2018 today is a much different world than we had 20 years ago. And I think the community college system, what we struggle with, and people won't realize that we try to stand up programs. We've stood a lot of programs up. The problem is not the program, it's filling the program.
Yeah, that's a great.
Unemployment
that's
is
a really
so
great
low.
point.
So you're like, oh, let's have a construction management program. Yeah. Well, everybody that's in construction is working.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to get the student population to fill the program to make it viable.
That's a really great point, Shawn, because not only that, but you also have a unique higher education system right now whereby it's unbelievably expensive. I mean, Maine's okay, but in general, it's a very expensive prospect to do that. So you're creating demand for it being cheaper somewhere. And so a community college that wants to do well and wants to offer what people want is going to respond with maybe more liberal arts classes or whatever, and not fill it with some of those ones that are actually really needed, getting some of those skills trained in the workforce.
Yeah, but I don't want to mislead people. We're not, the community college is definitely tech focused.
Sure.
Tech focused. And our tuition's like the lowest in New England. It's like $3,500 a year.
No, it's a great deal.
Yeah, and 92% of our students are commuter students, so they're not paying room and board, which really escalates the cost. So think about it. You can get, a degree, get your associate's degree for $7,000. I mean, that's like price of a used car, right? So the value proposition is still solid right there for the community college system. And then we've allowed now, so people can transfer those credits, 2+2 program, they're pre-qualified to go into USM or UMA, University of Maine of Augusta, wherever you are around the state. So that encourages people, say they're doing well in school, and they've learned the hands-on experiential learning and some of the gen ed courses that go with that. Now all of a sudden say, you know what, I might want to run a business. I might want to own a business. They can transfer right in and get a business degree at a university campuses. It saves them a lot of money.
Isn't, to your point about struggling to fill certain positions that are needed, because you've talked about this an awful lot on the campaign trail about how many jobs are out there that need to be filled. I mean, people are so desperate for people, and we're not getting people trained for them. How much of that is us talking to our kids? I mean, I'm thinking about when I was in college, and I was basically told to go to a 4-year school.
Right. Yeah.
And while it ended up being a good idea for me, there's a lot of people I went to school with in the University of Maine who probably shouldn't have been at a 4-year school. They should have been learning a trade and earning a lot of living, a really good living, for a really discounted cost.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Matt. Yeah, parents, they go to soccer games. They go, I know we had 4 kids we raised right in Gorham, my hometown, and people, where's Jimmy going to school? Where's Danielle going to school? So there's an enormous amount of peer pressure at the adult level.
Everybody gets that same speech about earning $1 million more when you have a 4-year degree.
Yeah. So I think it's a paternalistic instinct to want to make it better for your kids, than where you had it. So I get that, but you're right. It's the parents, it's the guidance counselors, it's the educators, because like your wife, she's passionate about education. If that student is not going to go on and continue their education, she's going to probably feel like she let them down. Like,
Right.
you know, she didn't get that across her passion. So what I believe is, you know, people talk a lot about equality, right? Equality is talked a lot about today. So my view, being a blue collar guy, you know, is remove the stigma associated with blue collar jobs, manufacturing, you know, and the trades, and create occupational equality.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be looking down your nose at someone that's going to go out there and make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year with zero or little college debt. Meanwhile, you just graduated 40 degree, you got a $35,000 job,
Yeah.
and you got 80 grand in debt. Where do you want to land? As long as the students and the parents have access to that knowledge and have those two pathways, then I think they'll make good choices. But right now, it's 4 years or go home, 4-year college or go home, and that's not. It's doing a disservice to our young people. And I'll tell you, that's something that I would champion because I'm a blue collar guy, and we'll get those pathways at younger ages. You know, those decisions need to be made or starting to be formed, you know, in middle school. You can't wait till a person's a junior or senior in high school and think they're going to do a shift and say, I'm going to go become an electrician or a carpenter or anything. That's
absolutely. I have an 11-year-old. I've already had these conversations with them, and you have to.
Yeah.
If they're going to get their, I mean, he wants to go become an engineer, great, you know, awesome. But you know, preparing them for not only the dignity of work that those kind of jobs can offer you, but also the quality of life. I mean, you can earn a lot of money being a welder or a mechanic these days.
And the jobs, absolutely. And once you learn a skill, I mean, like I'm a trades guy. You know, we built our own home. You know what I mean? It's not just limited to that one field. If you're good with your hands and you can think, you can do, you know, weld, you can fabricate, you can make things, build things, fix things. That's what we do.
Last question on the topic of higher ed before we move on to tax and fiscal issues is really just related to student debt in general, because that's the other elephant in the room when we're talking about this topic. Of course, is everybody is going to that 4-year school, and you know, if it's outside the state, it can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, although it can get that high when you're talking about some of the more prestigious institutes here in the state of Maine. But even if you're going to the University of Maine, you're going to leave with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Right. And the governor's proposed a specific solution, a couple different legislative sessions in a row. It's changed a little bit, but he's trying to do something about that, and he has a specific proposal for it.
Right.
Do you like his approach? Do you think that there's a better way of going about it?
$50 million bond, is that
basically
what you're talking about? I think, yeah. I mean, I think we're on the right track. I mean, the bottom line is, again, I got to kind of back up. This law just went into effect now to allow our teenagers to work. I think down to the ages of 14 and 15. Now, the thing that's got to go with that is we have to readjust our labor laws specific to industries. In other words, we can't even have a high school student run like an air sander. Okay, so we have to not only allow them to go to work, but we have to allow them to go to work in our businesses that have equipment that's safe to operate and safe to be around. We've gone way overboard on that because a lot of these retail sector jobs are going away. You know, you got Wayfair, you got Amazon, you know, so you can't just go over the mall anymore and get a good retail job. Those are going to dry up over the next 2 to 5 years, especially in the next decade. So we've got to have, again, these trade skills incorporated in our teenagers, allow them to go make some money and actually jumpstart them towards a career. So now all of a sudden they're making money, they're saving money, and that makes them more fiscally responsible. You know, that financial literacy that they're not getting in the school or at home. So now all of a sudden they're able to make better choices when they get right down and say, which school am I going to go? 2-year school, 4-year school? What's the cost associated? I'm going to have to pay this money back if I take out a loan. They're in a total different mindset talking with the parents than the young teenager that hasn't ever worked at all. They have no clue. They don't know when they hit that college campus. Here come the hedge fund managers, right? Hedge fund companies with these student loans, 6, 7, 8%. Bury them with that. Credit card companies, they're in over their heads so quick before they even know, because they're not street smart and they don't have any financial literacy really that they've learned through employment in the local community. So that's why I wanted to go back up. Yep. This is how we need to start that. Just like I was raised, I started working at delivering newspapers at 8, 10 years old, and that gravitated into keeping employed right through my teenage years.
Raking blueberries for me.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let's. We have probably about 20 minutes left or so, so I do want to make sure that we get to the real meat here. I know the issue of taxes, spending, government reform, that type of thing is probably top of the minds of a lot of the voters that you're talking to right now. Let's start with the question of taxes, because this has dominated multiple legislative sessions where the governor has proposed budgets that significantly revise how we tax the people of Maine. He's proposed a lower income tax that's a little bit broader, and then also an increased sales tax that's also a little bit broader, to pay for basically the government services that we have. What would you do? Two-part question for you. If you had no legislature, if you were King Moody of the state of Maine, which I know is an attractive idea, what would you set as policy? What's your ideal tax system look like? And then the more realistic question is, what do you think that your plan will be if you are governor, proposing to the legislature to try to get maybe towards that eventual dream goal that you're looking at? I mean, what do you want to do for an approach?
I love the way you phrased that. I never consider myself. The best leaders are the ones that have the philosophy, I work for the people, they don't work for me. And that's why I've run our company. 34% of it is owned by our co-workers with the ESOP. So let's start there. How do we get things done? We take on big initiatives and small initiatives. It's like saving money. You got to save the pennies to save the dollars. But we would implement initiatives like rolling the Maine Turnpike Authority into the DOT. We have so much duplication of services and in facilities across the state. That could be a $30 or $40 million,
savings
benefit,
yep.
and then ongoing as well. And the other thing it does, it puts infrastructure back onto the private tax rolls, which is really hurting. We have so much exempt properties here in the state. I mean, a couple billion, I think. It's crazy. It's taken on a life of its own. Got career centers. We've got, I think, 11 career centers we have across the state that are tied into our employment needs, Maine Quality Centers. So when unemployment was 10%, you needed a place to go in search of work, maybe line you up some training and things like that. Well, we're at full employment. So let's sell those career centers and move those folks into our community college campuses or our university campus. We already got that brick and mortar. Mm-hmm. And then see where I'm going, Matt?
Yeah.
So we'll take a look at what our inventory is on our facilities and our programs, and let's get rid of as much duplicity or duplication as we possibly can. And the same thing with administration. We saved $80 million in the university system. $80 million recurring, not one time, by taking back office functions and administration and consolidating all that. That's what we need to do across state government. Now, the monies which we save when we smart size government, really smart size, I'm talking major smart size. Now all of a sudden, you've got money, you've got resources. Two things that I would do. Number one, continue to build that rainy day fund. Why? Because when this economy goes down the other side, that's when government money should be injected to take the bottom out of a recession. So we don't have people that have to leave the state because there's no jobs.
Government money that wouldn't be debt.
Correct,
in that
exactly.
situation, right? Yeah.
Exactly right, man.
Yeah.
That's why we save, to invest at
Yeah.
the right time. So we've got that build up in the surplus of the rainy day fund, stabilization, whatever you call it. Boost that up. But the same thing, take a portion of that money, continue to reduce our income tax. I'd like to set 5% as a realistic target. Or 5.5%, right? We'll make it with the sales tax. Get that, continue to decrease the state income tax. But here's another important one. Let's take a hard look at what it would cost the state to remove the state income tax for people that are 65 or over. Now think about that. Mm-hmm. People are living longer, and we're forcing our successful business people, that people who have lived in the state the whole life, out of our state, 3 months a year, whatever, they have to be out 6 months in a day. So think about that psychologically, for people that would stay here, continue to contribute in the economy, maybe lend money to up-and-coming entrepreneurs, right, to get them going, to fund them, and stay active, and help Maine grow and continue to grow and prosper. That they swallow their pride, mm-hmm. It hurts them, and they go to Florida, and they basically don't participate anywhere near the level that they could or would. So I think that's another strategic tax reductions or eliminations. I think that's because I'm a strategic thing is say, okay, where do we need to go? What's the outcome we want?
Yeah.
How do we get there? What's going to motivate that to happen? What's the policy, right, Matt? What's the policy we need to put in place, mm-hmm. right, to drive that outcome? That's how my brain works.
Do you think that it's even remotely feasible to ever get to a point where Maine would be at a 0% income tax, or is that something that is just a future dream, but that you would like to see happen someday?
I'll tell you right now, here's how I look at things. Right now, the trends are going in the wrong direction. The population's decreasing.
Sure.
Demographic. Okay. We reverse those trends, anything's possible because that economic growth is going to feed on itself. So yeah, we can get there. Another thing we need to do, being a business, right? We're 48th in business. We're third or fourth the highest tax state in the nation. We're going to put the squeeze on, right? We're going to squeeze the taxes down, and we got to lift our business community up, just like New Hampshire, right? We start treating businesses like they do in New Hampshire.
Well, they're all interrelated, aren't they? I mean, those rankings are always we always come out, I think, 50th in workforce.
Right.
Right, and
that's right.
You know, taxes, business environment.
Right.
You know,
education,
pulls people or doesn't pull people here.
There's no opportunity. And guess what? They left.
Yeah.
But on that point, there's a 500,000 they had in the paper. 500,000 former Mainers that have left here around the globe, most of them in America. We need to incentivize. To your question about Governor Page, he's got the right concept on incentivizing these young people, or target 25 to 45-year-olds, or 48. We got to include Terry, but get those young former Mainers back here so they can add and revitalize our rural communities, especially. You can be a big fish in a little pond. If you're moving back into Millinocket or Monson or any of these small communities, you only need 4 or 5 people to bring some assets and some drive, and they can turn that small community around.
So the question of taxes is ultimately linked, I think, as you already indicated, to spending, and you were talking about certain efficiencies that can be done.
There's a lot
here or there.
There's a lot of waste.
Yeah. Is it beyond waste? Yeah. Is there any other big fish that you want to fry? And by that I mean, you look at the state budget. It's education and DHHS. It is basically takes up all the budget. I mean, it's by far the most of it. Are there things in there that you see as opportunities for wholesale reform, major pieces of those departments that could either be removed through duplication or reformed in how we do it?
Look at our schools, for example. You know why? Your wife might not like this idea, but if we're building schools all across the state, we've been doing it since we started schools. We've got 11 locations, okay, 7 of which we built brand new. Guess what? We didn't build totally to start all over again on the second location or third. We made modifications, we made enhancements and improvements, and we will continue to do that. But we've got the footprint that works. So let's say we have a school model that will service 200 to 400 student population, 4 to 6, 6 to 8. That's the school you get. We can save millions and millions of dollars in design, all these costs associated with starting over again, right? And then we say to the local community, hey, if you want to have a bigger entryway and have some art or whatever you do, do that with local dollars. Yeah. No problem. So it's not going to look like a McDonald's. You know what I mean? That's what they would say. Oh, we're going to look like a no, not. We're going to take the best performing school in terms of the cost per utilities, right? And it's the most efficient school, and that's what we're going to use as a model, and then we'll enhance it and tweak it as we go along. Millions and millions of dollars of savings right there, Matt.
Very interesting. As it relates to improving the, I guess, the state's performance economically and getting it better for business and whatnot, what else besides reforming the tax code and maybe government spending a little bit can be done? I mean, I'm specifically thinking about changes to labor. Your right to work is brought up a lot, but what do you think of that concept? And I guess, are there other things that you think need to be done to improve the economy and make it a better place for Maine businesses to be started, grow, and maybe attract some businesses from elsewhere into the state?
I'm just going to use one word. Is compete. Anything that we do policy-wise has got to make Maine more competitive. That's what all this really, education, we've got to teach young people to compete and have that drive, have that desire to want to compete. We've taken a lot of that away. It's like, oh, geez, let's just water everything down. Everyone gets a trophy. Well, that has a price associated with it. So we need to make sure that our education system is teaching, young people how to compete. To let them get out there in the workforce at a young age around our local communities. They'll learn how to compete. Talk to the store owner and talk to the people they work with. Once they get out, go on to higher ed. It's taxes, our overhead, everything that we implement has got to pass the test, okay, legislatively. Is this going to make Maine more competitive? Because we got New Hampshire eating our lunch, we got Canada eating our lunch, and now we're in a global scale. You're going to work in a global competitive environment. And Maine has got to be, and Maine can compete. Maine's always competed, but we haven't been focused on making ourselves more competitive, and that's what we need to do in terms of the legislature.
And yet at the same time, we've instituted a system whereby our minimum wage is going to be going up to $100,000.
Yeah, we can hit all the reasons why we're not, right?
Right,
but 3.8% taxes coming in there. That's going to be devastating.
So I get back to I guess some of the first conversations we had in this talk. How do you as governor combat that when you've got this referendum system that's basically going around what you would do?
Right.
How do you do that? I mean, the minimum wage, for instance,
you've got to call
there's
out
no
the
legislative action right now.
You've got to call out the legislators, and you've got to call out individual or as a group, and have the data, and have the information, the education to take to the general public, and you have to win in the court of public opinion, and that puts pressure on the legislators to say, hey, maybe this 3.8% tax is not a good idea. We need to take a look at this. This is going to drive professional people away. I talked to, IDEX Labs, WEX, Hannaford, all these top CEOs, and they're having a hard time attracting professional talent here now. I'm talking people that earn over that threshold, 127,000. They're having a hard time attracting them now. Can you imagine if it goes up 1.9% on them and 1.9% on the employer, the company? That's a game changer. I mean, it's a deal breaker. So these are the things that having a business person in the Blaine House who lives and sleeps and breathes how to compete, business, how do we do it faster, how do we do it better, how do we do it cheaper. It's on my brain 24/7. That's what we need to bring to the legislature, which is probably 90% retired educators, state workers, whatever. They
lawyers.
They need a voice that I'm respectful. I'm going to be relentless. I'm not going to let up. They're going to get sick of it, but I will go to the end of the earth to convince them to make sure that the policies that they put in place are going to help continue to grow Maine's economy and grow our young, healthy population. Those are the two priorities, and they're kind of mutually inclusive.
All this conversation about what's best for the business community in Maine and how to grow it, really all, as I think you've already talked about, is already revolving around cost. It's how much does it cost to do business here? Does it make sense to come here to try to invest because I'm going to be able to pull out enough profit to make this worthwhile for me, right? And you have other places that have a more competitive environment where it costs less to do business.
No question.
One of those things that's hanging around Maine's neck, though, is energy.
Yeah, no doubt about
it. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to talk about energy, but, there are businesses that are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Don't have enough energy, right?
Yeah, right, no kidding.
Keep going.
But, you're talking about businesses that pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in energy costs to basically fund their organization and their group. How does Maine, which does lead New England, I guess, in energy cost, how does it actually get competitive with the Carolinas and, in some of these places that have warmer weather and what have you? Is it realistic to even think that you could? And if so, I guess,
absolutely.
How do you do it?
Absolutely. And I think, we're going to have an opportunity coming up with this transmission line, right, that's coming out of Canada. I mean, that's got to be brokered. That's got to be negotiated in a way that Maine advantages itself by making this happen. So there's one deal that's looming on the table that I think we could advantage ourselves. But here's the big one with energy. Okay, we deregulated energy, production and cost or spending. And when you do that, now competition lowered the cost of production, but not distribution. So now all of a sudden distribution, $26 million hike last year. Now distribution has kind of pushed it back up to that 14, 15 cent kilowatt for the residential consumer or whatever. So why is that? Geez, we only got 2 real distribution companies here in the state of Maine. So every time when you look at increasing cost, right, we're not competitive, it always comes back to capitalism. We don't have a capitalistic system when you only got 2 providers the whole state of Maine.
It's a monopoly.
Yeah. Look at a healthcare system. 2 or 3 providers. Why are costs going through the roof? Because we've gotten away from a capitalistic model where competition drives price and consumer choice, and it's that simple. So that's what's hurting us in energy. We need to deregulate the distribution so that people can take chunks, this 100 whatever geographic chunks, county, whatever it is. You need bucket trucks, you need linemen. Now there's power stations, things beyond just line crews and pruning, trimming, things like that. So I want to oversimplify this. But that's what we need to do if we're going to be competitive. Because it's not so much the energy production. We're producing more than we're consuming. So that in itself flies in the face of supply and demand, right? So you got to scratch your head. What's doing it? It's distribution costs. And that's why they fight solar. That's why they fight cogen. That's why they fight biomass. Because those are energy providers and suppliers that are on campus that want to export their energy to the local community and the distribution companies are fighting them tooth and nail.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? We could revolutionize the state's ability to produce power at the local municipal level if the distribution issue was solved.
Well, unfortunately, we're more or less out of time, Shawn. So before I let you go, I do want to ask one last question, which is sort of related to the first one. We obviously talked about a lot of issues here. I could ask you 100 more questions, and we could keep going for hours, I'm sure. But, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, no question.
Out of what we talked about today, or maybe something that we missed, is there an issue that just strikes to the heart of Shawn Moody more than anything else? Is there something that you care and you're passionate about that you want to be remembered for when you leave the Moody administration 4 or 8 years after you get elected?
Fair enough.
What is that issue to Shawn Moody?
It's Maine. It's Maine. It's our state. We're losing our state. Between the ballot referendums and, again, not being competitive, telling our kids to leave, there's so many things that we can improve on, and we can market Maine. Now's the time to buy Maine. It really is. I'm convinced of that. We're the safest state in the nation. We got clean air, clean water, great quality of life. We got the ocean. We got 6,000 lakes and ponds, 4 seasons. I love Maine. And all we need to do, I believe, in the Moody administration is get everybody focused. What happens in politics, people don't stay focused. They're worried about drama and headlines and all this politics stuff. They're not focused on the main people. And they can't focus on what's going to improve our economy, what's going to improve, get our young, healthy population back here. How do we talk to education in a way that they'll actually listen and they'll actually say, hey, we'll work with you. Because there's a co-benefit here. Our student population is dropping dramatically. What are they going to do? They see it. I mean, they can't ignore the fact that we need a reform. So they want to work with somebody, in me being the governor, they're going to want to work with someone that has vision. And that's what I have for a vision of the state of Maine. We're going to keep Maine, Maine. Because there's a reason why we love Maine. And the reason why we grew up here, our parents grew up here, our grandparents grew up here, is because Maine is unique. Maine is special in so many ways, but it's because of the Maine people. We're hardworking, we're resourceful, we're frugal, and we've gotten away from our core values. If we return to our core values that we were taught, my grandparents were taught, tighten up, find pleasure in saving money, become a role model, how you innovate and find ways to save money, not just any fool can spend it, and just restore to the Maine way, the heritage that we've created here. We produce things, we build things, we manufacture things. We have the forest products center. We have so many natural resources here. But the biggest natural resource that we haven't paid attention to is our youth. We've been worried about our exit strategy because we're an aging state. We haven't been focused on our entry staff, feeder system. And that's what's going to continue our focus on to revitalize our state. That's what it's going to take because young people are energetic. They'll be innovative. If we open up their minds and get out of their way, they'll be entrepreneurial. Get government off their back, off all of our backs. Businesses so that they can succeed, and like you said, so they can be profitable. If businesses are profitable, they'll pay the wages, they'll pay the benefits, they'll expand those to their coworkers. But if you're not making any money, pretty tough to get excited about 3 days paid leave or a 3.8% surcharge coming our way.
Right. Well, I just want to say a special thanks to Shawn Moody for joining us here for this conversation about policy. Really was a good time.
And thank the Maine Heritage Policy Center.
Well,
we're a member, obviously, and you guys are doing great work.
You are, and we thank you for that. And it's been a real pleasure to do this. We still have more ahead of us, though. So keep looking for more videos from the Maine Heritage Policy Center.